like to introduce Craig Knippenberg to everybody who has traveled far to come here to speak to us tonight. He is from Denver, and he also has his master's degree in clinical social work, and he received his master's of divinity through the University of Denver as well. So tonight he is here to talk to us about the social brain, and we are very excited that he will explain that all to us and really what does that mean. So please just enjoy yourself and have fun learning. But then side note, if you have children in childcare, the older kids are going outside. So if you have a coat for them and you want them to have their coat, I'm sorry, but you might want to run it to them now.
Way to clear out the house right when I'm starting.
I just got that note. It's recorded just now. But come back.
Yeah, you come back. You want to go play with the kids?
Nice.
Thank you very much. And I'll introduce my son Alex, who's here as well in the audience. He's a freshman at Colorado University in Boulder. We actually planned our trip about 2 months ago. We got a private tour of the White House lined up for tomorrow. And so I contacted Barb Jones, who I talked to a couple years ago about coming out to speak. And I said, I'm going to be out there. If you want me to come by, I'd be happy to on Friday night. She's like, great. So we got that planned. Then last Monday, I'm in Denver reading the paper, and it says, White House tours canceled because of sequester. I'm like, you got to be kidding. The White House tour. So we're going to museums tomorrow. The museum or something, and then the flight and the total. So it's a joy to be here. It's also great to see Barb again. I knew Barb at Valparaiso University. The Valparaiso Crusaders, great Lutheran school in northern Indiana by Chicago. They are in the NCAA tournament again. They won the Horizon League the other night. My brother and I in Colorado watched, and he's a Valpo alum. I knew Barb and both of her sisters, Carol and Nancy. And one of the things I was going to say, I didn't know her parents were going to be here tonight. She just told me when I saw her again for the first time in like 34 years, like since 1981. And I said, I was going to tell her at the beginning, we're talking about social skills tonight. Part of what we'll be talking a little bit later is about nonverbal processing, the ability to notice social cues and to respond to those. And the fact that all three of the Davis girls had incredible social skills. And the best part was they were nice girls. They used them to include others and make friends. They didn't use them for power and control. Now you think about good social skills and power and control, what phrase comes up for girls? The mean girl phrase, right? That's the only difference, is what you do with those skills. And so I thought, who should be giving the talk is Barb's parents. Because they did a phenomenal job of raising three lovely girls who had great social skills and were just the nicest women on the planet. So if I miss anything, you chime in. I'm from Denver. I have a master's in social work and a master of divinity degree. I have a private practice, the biggest one in Colorado, for 33 years now. We've got a bunch of different offices. We specialize in group therapy for kids, so I do a lot of social skills groups with staff that does that for ages preschool through young adulthood. I also consult for St. Anne's Episcopal School. It's a private school, Episcopalian school, and I teach K through 8 and developed a brain-based curriculum to teach kids about their brain and parents as well. I have a book proposal out right now and some videos on the internet, and that one flyer is if you like what you hear tonight, go watch the videos and then give me like a tweet or whatever, a thumbs up, and that'll help me get the book published as well. So lots of different things going on. I'm also a parent. My wife and I, we're a blended family. We have a 35-year-old son, a 26-year-old daughter, a 19-year-old son, and we are currently adopting a 7-year-old girl. So we're about 3 months into the adoption process, and around Father's Day, I'll become a new dad again. So we covered the span. How many of you have preschool age? How many preschoolers? Okay, elementary age? Middle school parents? They're always the most tired looking, the middle school parents. We'll explain why. High school, I've got high school kids? Okay, so we're going to cover, we'll mostly focus on elementary age, kind of preschool, elementary. Got a little bit of stuff on the teen brain, if you do more on that. That's a whole other talk in itself, but we'll try to target the younger kids. And you're welcome to ask questions as we're going along. You can follow on the PowerPoint, and we'll kind of zip along. On the title page, what's great is I pulled that off the website for Open Arms. Was it the church or Open Arms? The book from Isaiah. And about your children will live in peace. teach them. The Lord will teach them. And we also know in the title, Living in Christian Community, that since the ancient Israelites, God intended us to live together. We survive in a community. We don't survive very well on our own, just like any other species. We survive in a community. Those who can work together, play together, trust each other, love each other, care for each other, do a lot better in life. They have all kinds of much more success than those who can't. The other wonderful thing, in addition to the Lord teaching us, or the teachers here at Open Arms teaching the kids, is that God gave us the brain to learn. And we're pre-wired, we're hardwired to learn these social abilities, to learn cognitive skills, and have teachers who can expand upon those as we grow and develop. Now, in terms of the social and emotional brain, we're going to talk about three main brain areas tonight. We'll go through all the three of those, and we'll talk about how they interplay with each other. I do want to cover a couple brain basics. Whoops, too fast. By about age 12, your son or daughter will have about 90 billion brain cells. So they're pretty much down around age 12. They'll add another 10 billion, especially in the front part of the brain. We'll talk about that in our first segment. But as adults, you have around 100 billion brain cells in your brain. Now, what's really amazing is the synapses. Each brain cell. So you have to think of a brain cell. If I'm a brain cell, I've got the main body, and I've got these arms called axons, and they stretch out all over the place. And they have little extensions growing off of them. And they make connections with other neurons. Each brain cell has 7,000 connections. So think, that's more than the federal deficit, I think. 100 billion brain cells, each with 7,000 connections. Wires going off in different directions. Okay? The brain cells aren't connected. There's a little gap between them. Would you mind just sticking out your arm for me? Thank you. So spread your fingers out. These are called dendrites, little fingers. And we've got a little gap between them. And we're going to talk about some of the neurotransmitters tonight that take the message across the gap. So the easiest way to think about it is this is a letter. The chemical is like a little letter, and it's going to go across the gap, and it's going to touch her. And when it touches her, she's going to have a little electrical activity, and then she'll figure out which brain cells should go down, and it will touch the next one, and so on. And we pass little letters throughout our brain. And the basic message that those brain cells say is either turn a thought on or turn a thought off. Turn on a behavior, turn off a behavior. Turn on a thought, turn off a thought. So your ones with the preschoolers, are they good at staying on focus yet or staying on task? No, they have thoughts going off all the time, right? Our little 7-year-olds, she's a little behind in that area. So during homework time, I'm constantly saying, Lily, stay focused, honey. Focus now, focus. And next thing you know, we're touching the dog. Next thing you know, she's looking at her blouse. Like, focus, honey, focus. She has a hard time turning those things off. So that'll take us to our first area of the brain. This front part right here. It's really a very unique part of the brain for humans that separates us from other species. It is what I talk to kids about. It's the president of your brain. It's the frontal lobe. And if you've seen psychology reports or teachers nowadays, they'll talk about executive functioning. Executive is another word for president, right? It's the part of your brain that helps you do things like paying attention, organizing yourself, emotional control, impulse control, what's called working memory. So if you say to your child, okay, honey, we're going to be leaving soon, go upstairs, get your shoes and socks on, and don't forget to bring down your permission slip, okay? Now, there are some kids, maybe 7 or 8-year-olds, who go, yes, Mom, and they zip upstairs, they know you're leaving in 5 minutes, they get their stuff, and they come running down, okay? Can the littler ones do that yet? Not quite, right? But you also have 8 or 9-year-olds who starts going upstairs, and they look down and they say, oh, Lego, I haven't seen this Lego in 2 years. And they sit there and they're playing, and you come up and go, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm getting ready, right? They have a hard time staying focused, staying on task. That area of the brain, for girls, it's also movement control. So for the kids there, how many of you have fidgety kids? Right? How many of you are fidgety yourself as adults? Are you fidgeters? I'm a bit of a fidgeter, right? The movement control center of the brain is right in the middle of your frontal lobe, right? The Tiggers of the world, do you know Tigger? You would guess that Tigger has a hard time with that movement control center. His frontal lobe's really not working. It does that. It also does what's called gating, which is the ability to knock out sounds. So as you're listening to me tonight, well, are you mowing yet here in the east? So you might hear the mower or something go by, or a truck go by, or an ambulance go outside. What's your frontal lobe supposed to tell your ears right there? Focus on him. Listen to his voice. Don't gate out the sound of the ambulance. Okay? Now, for some reason in schools, especially when I'm in St. Anne's teaching in the mornings, for some reason the maintenance guys always decide to like snowplow or do the leaf blower right in the middle of the school day. And you got 20 heads looking out the window. I even look out the window sometimes. That's like too tempting to resist. But your frontal lobe helps you gate out other sounds, other things, other senses that are coming into your brain. It really keeps you focused and in control. A real fun, quick story. The first time doctors and scientists started thinking about what's the purpose of this part of our brain was in about 1870, not too far away from here in Vermont. When you're from Colorado, everything in the east is all close together. So I'm sure Vermont's like 20 minutes from here, right? That's right. It's just east, right? There was a railroad worker. His name was Phineas Gage. Has anybody heard of the story? Fascinating guy. He was a railroad worker. They described him as a refined gentleman. Okay, now think about railroad workers in 1870. What do you think most of the guys are like? They're rough, right? And probably not well educated and, fairly foul. But Phineas was organized. He could stay on task. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He didn't use inappropriate language that we call it nowadays. He was a refined, sophisticated guy. So they made him foreman of his railroad crew. Now, the way they used to do blasting, when they had to blast away rock, is the first guy in the crew would drill a hole. Okay, so about this big around, drill a hole a couple feet deep. Next guy would come along and pour gunpowder in the hole and put a wick in. Now, if you lit it right now, where's the energy going to go? Straight up, the top of the hole. It's not going to blow up any rock, right? So they would pour sand on top of it. If you lit it now, what are you going to have? A sandstorm, right? It's going to just shoot out the top of the hole. You have to make the sand harder than the rock below it. And the way they did it is they took a 3-foot pole called a tamping iron, 3 or 4 feet long, this like the shape of a pen. And the fourth guy, which was Phineas, would come along, put the pole in the hole, take a sledgehammer, and hit it. Okay? Once he had done that, then that sand is hard enough, that's harder than the rock below, and the energy from the blast goes down. So one day they were out working. First guy drills the hole, second guy pours in the gunpowder, third guy was kind of spacey that day and forgot to put the sand in. Phineas came up, put the pole in the hole, took the sledgehammer and hit it. It exploded, it shot up through his cheek, went behind his eye, and popped out the top of his head. Blew his entire frontal lobe completely away. He's laying there, they think he's dead. The other guys come up. Phineas is not dead, he's awake. He never lost consciousness. And they're like, whoa, he's alive. So they took him into a bunkhouse, and about 3 months later, they kind of put some skin over there and tried to patch it up as best they could. From what I understand, to clean it, they poured whiskey down the hole. It's like, ooh, that sounds a little creepy. About 3 months later, Phineas got out of bed and went back to work. The difference was that now he couldn't pay attention. He had no self-control. He couldn't organize himself. He had no sense of time management anymore. He started drinking. He started gambling. He started fighting. He was losing control of his emotions constantly. He was a complete caveman. So he went from this sophisticated gentleman to being this complete caveman when that thing shot through his head. Now, he was still smart, and this is the part that's really important. So when I'm talking to children, and we're talking about how all kids, and if you look on the scale of executive functioning, average female is about the 80th percentile. So if I gave you a test of how well you're paying attention tonight, average female is going to be about 80th percentile. The average male is about 50th percentile, okay? Now when I explain it to kids, I say that does not mean you're not smart. Your cognitive processing is further back in the brain. It's just that the frontal lobe is telling you which thought to turn on and which thoughts to turn off. So if I'm a guy and it's 10:30, 11 o'clock, I'm a fourth grade guy, and it's the middle of math class, and I know lunch and recess is coming up, and I'm taking you on again at 2 square. When I start thinking about how I'm going to look at you today, my president's supposed to say what? Save that for during lunch. Think about it later. right now, think about math. Stay focused, right? So it's not your ability to be smart, it's your ability to control all those light bulbs. Oftentimes with gifted students, exceptional kids, they often have a lot of light bulbs going off. And it's very hard for them to coordinate it all. And I consult for a couple of gifted schools out of Colorado. And you see that's a common thing for kids who have a lot of ideas going off and they have a hard time keeping them on track and managing all those thoughts they have. Now with Phineas, he was still a pretty bright guy. After the accident, he finally got fired from the railroad because of his behavior. He went to Harvard. He went to the medical school at Harvard and said, I bet you'd like my brain after I die. And they said, we'd love it. Gave him a bunch of money. Guess what he did with it? He drank, played cards. Ran out of all his money, he went to Yale. He sold his brain to the Yale Medical School. Didn't tell him about Harvard, right? Took the money, gambled it, drank it all away. He went to Princeton the third time, got the money again. This time he died of acute alcohol poisoning. He drank himself to death, right? He had no self-control, no impulse control whatsoever. Harvard did get his brain. Do we have any Harvard medical graduates? I guess it's at the Harvard Medical School, and the only way you can see it is if you're a medical student there. Other than online, you can see photos of it. Every year they have up in Vermont where it happened, they have a celebration. They used to take his brain and the skull up there to Vermont every year, but a medical student dropped it about 20 years ago. She had the skull, so I guess Phineas stays at Harvard now. That's the place you can see Phineas. So again, that's the first time people start thinking about it. What does this do for us? The other thing with time management, this is a really important one, your little kids versus the older ones. It's not the ability to read a clock. It's the ability to think about how long would something take me, or how long is that going to take. When Alex was in like 3 or 4, we'd get in the car to go somewhere, and he'd say to me, like, how long before we get there? Did your kids ask you that before in the car? How long before we're there, right? And I could say to him, excuse me, that's about 2 of your videos. Now his videos for the preschoolers were like Veggie Tales, there goes a police car, there goes a fire truck. How long are those preschool videos? 20 minutes to a half hour. And if you take the commercial, about 20 minutes of preschool video time, right? And I can remember saying, that's about 2 of your videos. And I can remember watching him just kind of go, okay. And his little brain could figure that out, okay? I was in a class of 4th graders the other day. I said, I want you to turn to page 150 in a particular book. I want you to look at that page before you read it. I want you to estimate how long will it take you to read it. And write that down. Then I timed it to read how long it took me to read it. And I had to write down how long it took me to read it, okay? By 4th grade, most of the kids, about half the kids were pretty close. If they said a minute, they were like at 50 seconds, or they were at 70 seconds, okay? They were pretty close. I had one kid who guessed a minute, it took him 3 minutes, right? And then we kind of calculated now if you're a college kid, or even if you're a 4th grader or 5th grader, there's a lot of homework for kids nowadays. How many of you think there's a lot more homework there is now than there was when you were a kid? There's a ton more. Between 1990 and 2000, it had doubled the amount of homework. Now that's back to 2000, so imagine what it is now. I haven't seen the latest research on that. A lot of homework, so you're 4th grade or 5th grade, you come home and say, Mom, can I watch TV before I do my homework? And your mom says, yeah, honey, well, how long is it going to take you? And you say, oh, well, 45 minutes, I'll have it done. That's what you calculated. But then she lets you watch the show, you start your homework, and it takes you 2.5 hours. What's your mom say to that? No homework TV for you, mister. You'll be doing the homework first. So it's the ability to accurately measure time. For teen drivers, we'll talk about the frontal lobe of teenagers in a second. For time management, it's down to the microsecond. When you make a left turn, what's your brain have to calculate? Think about it. Like we turn left to get into the church. There's cars coming, right? How long will it take me to get across this road? That's your frontal lobe that figures that out, okay? Teen drivers, that's the most difficult move. The teenage frontal lobe is not working very well. Often they have accidents because they don't perceive time. The kid who kicks a kickball across the street, you're hoping his president says, stop first, okay? Once you stop, what are you supposed to do? Look both ways. Now, if you see a car coming, you have to figure out, can I run across the street to get to that ball, or do I need to wait, okay? Kids with a severe executive functioning difficulty, so the average guy is about 50th percentile. If you're about the 10th percentile or lower in the testing, does anybody know what that's called? I know you've heard of it. Have you heard of ADHD? That's what it is. ADD is if you're about the 10th percentile of the world, okay? So you really have struggles with executive function. For kids with ADHD, they're off by as much as 50% on time management. So when they see the car coming, what do they think? I can make it, right? I know some kids who wouldn't even stop. They don't even think about stopping, right? They're just doing it, right? So they're often having more accidents than other kids because they're not stopping or they're not managing time. Now again, the guys at the 50th percentile, women at the 80th percentile, let's think about God's creation. Why would God want to do that? Why would God say, I want half the species to have really good attention and impulse control, the other half to be more distracted? Any theories? Any guesses? Think about the ancient Israelites wandering the wilderness. They're out in the desert, the wilderness. What do they have to worry about? Predators. The Egyptians coming after them, right? They got to be on guard. Now let's say it's Saturday. I'm the rabbi. Saturday night, we're going to have a little service or something, right? Friday night, we're going to have a little service around the fire. If all of you were paying attention to me while I'm talking, what could happen to us? Some animal's going to sneak up and grab your buddy Bob, and he's going to be gone, right? Or the enemy's going to sneak up on you. Would it make sense to have half of us be distractible? Right? If you're distractible, you hear a noise, hopefully you pick up your spear and throw it. Now, if you hit a mountain lion, that's what we have in Colorado, those are the scariest ones. Bears, you can hear a mile away. Mountain lions creep up on you, they're kind of creepy. I throw the spear, I hit the mountain lion, I'm the hero, right? Now, if it was my buddy Bob going to go to the bathroom, I'm not really the hero anymore, right? Everybody's like, why'd you do that again? You're always killing people. Why are you throwing spears everywhere? Well, because I'm impulsive. Men's vision, our eyesight for guys. We are oriented towards movement. We notice movement. What purpose does that serve in the ancient Israelites? What did men do most of the time? Hunting, right? When you're out hunting, what do you look for? Movement. You look for something to move. And then you get distracted, off you go. In traditional cultures, especially thousands of years ago, I was talking to kids about if we're living in Colorado, your Native Americans out in the plains or up in the mountains. The women, if they are going to do food collection, what do? Picking berries, right? Women's eyesight is geared towards color and detail. Women see color and detail much better than men. Men see movement. So if you're looking for blueberries, you need to be able to do that. You also need to have good movement control, because if the women start running around through the blueberry patch, chasing each other in roughhousing, what do you have? Juice. You don't really have berries anymore, right? So women have that better self-control, focused attention, they can spot things out, they have better frontal lobe function. In terms of development, does any 2-year-old have much of a frontal lobe? No. It's the last part of the brain to develop, okay? So it's typically girls are about 1.5 to 2 years ahead of boys. So around age 3 for most girls, they see their little frontal lobes start to develop. Before that, who's their frontal lobe?
Mom,
You are, right? You're the one saying, we'll have a consequence, right? Or we have a positive thing if we use some good judgment. You're the frontal lobe. 3 or so girls come onto that scale. They start developing that frontal lobe. Boys, about 1.5 to 2 years behind. When I go into any kindergarten classroom and I sit down and talk to the kids, what are most of the girls doing? They sit nice. I say, crisscross applesauce, spoons in the bowl. And guess what they do? They sit and they put their spoons in the bowl. And how do they look? Pretty. It could be after lunch and recess and they still look pretty, right? They got the curls, the little bow in their hair, and their outfits still look nice after lunch. And they're sitting there, and when they want to talk, what do? They raise their hand. What are most of the boys doing? They're spinning around, right? You're touching things, you're touching their friend. When they talk, they blurt it right out. They've got food all over them from the playground, maybe grass stains. And they always want to touch me, like they'll start touching my shoes or whatever. I'm like, back off, man. Like, don't touch me. But they're always constantly moving, blurting out. They just don't have the frontal lobe. Now, around age 2nd grade, you're hoping by the end of 1st, 2nd grade, you're hoping all the kids are about in that arrangement. You can have boys that are incredibly great with frontal lobe functioning. You'll just see more girls up on that end. When you look at the lower end, the ADHD spectrum, typically most people think it's about 3 to 1 males to females. So you're going to see more boys on this end than girls. Can you have girls with it? Yes, right? It's just that you're going to see the averages, okay? But by about second or third grade, you're hoping most of the kids are on there. Can third graders do book reports? Yeah, how many of you had a third grader that does book reports? Those projects, right? They're capable of that and thinking and planning ahead. Third and fourth grade, we're doing those book reports. Oh, before third grade. Yeah. Academics is really cranked up. I went to this talk once and the guy said, the problem with, we keep giving kids more homework and then we keep adding new curriculum. But have you ever heard of a school getting rid of old curriculum? No, they just keep adding more, right? And when they can't finish in the school day, guess what they do? It's homework, right? And guess who has to help? You do, right? You're in the trenches. Homework ruins a lot of family time. Really makes a lot of family time pretty miserable. And it's just too much, and they just keep adding more. In Colorado, I don't know what you have here, we have something called TCAP, which is standardized testing. That is just a nightmare. It's been going on the past week. All the kids I see come to the office are just fried. The parents are fried, the teachers are fried, but they have to gear a lot towards getting ready for that test. And for the kids I see especially, they really struggle. Imagine if you're on the 10th percentile and you've got to sit for 2 or 3 hours filling out bubbles and reading and paying attention. Is that kind of hard? That's pretty tough. Little boys need to move. You probably know that here at your program. I spoke at a genders-based conference last week, the difference between boys and girls, and boys really need to move. They do better with movement, they do better with lights, they do better with loud sounds, loud voices. Girls do better in little groups, quieter, right? There are some big differences between boys and girls. But in general, the frontal lobe functioning, we're hoping everybody's on there about 3rd or 4th grade. As you hit puberty, they all sort of slide right off, okay? So the reason for that is that frontal lobe is going to double in size, especially during middle school, okay? It won't be finished. For girls, you're finished at about 26. For males, it's about 28, okay? Now, the car rental companies, when we rented the car today, can my son drive the car to the 19? No. Okay, what do car rental companies know? That if you rent a car to a 21-year-old guy, what's he going to do with it? Four-wheeling! Let's see if this little Hyundai can go over that mountain over there, right? The car rental companies have known that for a long time. They have very high accident rates. And so for guys, it's not until about 28. But between puberty and 26, 28, the frontal lobe is really struggles, especially in middle school. Middle schoolers are more spacey. They tend to be pretty disorganized. They're always kind of struggling, keeping track of things. They also smell really bad, especially the guys. That has to do with their feet, right? But that part, for girls, you'll typically see with girls around the end of 8th grade, you'll see a jump in maturity. This time of year, the girls at our school, the 8th grade girls, they're ready for high school. They are done with elementary school and middle school. They're ready for high school. For the guys, it's about the end of sophomore year before you see a little more sign of getting out of the junior high guy years. Do you know, have any of you had junior high guys? They're very unattractive. They're really kind of just ping-ponging all over the place. And my favorite line, which was my dear son, we were at an event and the board of trustees at this private school were having this social activity, and some of the boys were getting a little rough. And one of the moms on the board came out and said, "Now remember, settle down, boys. Remember, it's all fun and games until someone gets hurt." And my son looks up and says, "And then it's hysterical." And I'm like, "Oh my God, you just said that. I can't believe you said that." That's a junior high guy's way of thinking about it, right? They just look for the most obscure thing. Unfortunately, most of our TV comedy shows nowadays, what do they cater to? Sophomoric male humor. Family Guy, The Simpsons, right? That's pretty tame compared to Family Guy. Beavis and Butthead. South Park, which was written by 2 guys just south of Denver, an area called South Park, Colorado, beautiful place in their state. Those shows have been around for the last 20 years, and they glorify every bit of adolescent male guy humor, right? Unfortunately, the younger guys, they don't really understand it very well either. Most of the humor is geared for adults, right? So that's just that stuff running rampant. The last thing, the second one on there, I want to talk about the marshmallow before we move on. Dopamine levels. So earlier when I said this is the chemical dopamine, I'm going to pass it to the next brain cell. The primary neurotransmitter the brain uses is dopamine. The frontal lobe uses is dopamine. There's another one called norepinephrine that's fairly large in the frontal lobe, but dopamine is the big player. Okay? For kids on this end of the scale, especially with ADHD, they have low dopamine levels. They just don't have enough letters going back and forth saying turn that thought off or turn that thought on. In adolescents, their dopamine levels drop in half. So this thing is growing. And when I say it's going to double in size, the easiest way to think about it, it's not like their heads are going to explode. It's like, have you ever seen the Charlie Brown Christmas tree? Do you ever cut trees? Do you get to do that here? In Colorado, we go through the mountains and we cut a tree down over here. Do you have any places you do that up here? Yeah, so, usually when you go to the mountains to get a tree, it's like the Charlie Brown tree, right? Now, if you go to the nursery, what's it look like? Beautiful. It's got branches everywhere. And that's what that adolescent brain is doing. It is branching all over the places. So those 7,000 synapses, that's what's going on. So the actual size of it this way is not going to get much bigger, but it grows a lot more arms. So it's connecting all over the place. And while it's growing and developing, they just have a hard time using it. It doesn't work so well. Again, later on, then it's going to work better and the dopamine levels go back up. And again, later we're going to talk about dopamine levels. But again, that's the main player for the frontal lobe. There are about 300 different chemicals in our brains. So our brain uses all sorts of different chemicals to work and communicate with each other. Dopamine is the big one up here. Can you resist the marshmallow? I'll finish with that one and we'll crank on. Study done in the 1950s. They're still following up on the kids. They're my age. But in the 1950s, they started working with 4-year-olds. And they did it's called the marshmallow test. And the psychologist would have the child come in and sit at the table with them. And the psychologist would say, I'm going to give you a marshmallow. Now I'm going to give it to you and I'm going to leave the room. And they showed them a clock. And they said, now I'm going to wait. I'm going to come back in 10 minutes. If you cannot eat it, when I come back, I'll give you 4 more. Okay? So they filmed them. And I've seen some of the tapes of it. Okay? So they did this like 100 kids. What do you think some of them did? Ate it before the person even left the room. Before she even said the directions, right? How many of you are teachers? Do we have teachers? When you're a teacher and you start to give the direction and some kid raises their hand to answer, they start writing already, and you're like, you need to listen to the directions first, right? And they just jump right into it. So about 33% of the kids, a third of the kids just ate the marshmallow. They just chunked it right down, okay? About another third, the middle group, tried to wait. And in the films, they licked it, put it back. There was one kid that took a chunk out, ate it, and reformed it. And I thought, that's a Wall Street guy right there. He's ready for it. He's a lawyer. They would sit on their hands, right? They touch it. But on average, after 6 or 7 minutes, what did they do? They ate. Okay? Then they had another third, and guess what they did? They waited. Okay? Now, they followed those kids. They followed them in their 20s, 30s, 40s. They're doing the research right now in the 50s. They're in their 50s. They're doing the research on them. They've looked at every possible measurement of life success you can imagine. The one they're looking at right now is health and longevity. In terms of education, happiness in their family, health, longevity, incarceration, drug and alcohol addictions, what do you think they found with each of those groups? What would you guess? The kids that ate it right away, they had tough lives. They were not doing very well. They had higher rates of incarceration, not much school success. They didn't make it far. They didn't get their 4-year degree. Maybe didn't get their associate's degree. They couldn't control themselves for the long-term goals in life, right? The 4 marshmallows, when you're a full preschooler and you can wait 10 minutes, that's a long time to wait to get those 4 marshmallows. Now, you might be getting your college degree, and you've got to wait how long? 4 years, right? 5 years. It takes a long perseverance, right? The middle group, they were in the middle. The kids who waited, they had the most success. They also, now in their 50s, have longer longevity. They also have lower rates of diabetes and health issues. The marshmallow eaters, they have higher rates of diabetes. Just across almost everything, okay? That's your president. That's your president that helps you have self-control, to be able to wait, to control your impulses, to succeed in life. Now, as a parent, later on we're going to talk about tips and suggestions. You need to know which kid you have. Do you have one of the eaters? Do you have a waiter? Or do you have the kid in the middle? Because you need to adjust your parenting to that kid. If you've got the marshmallow eater and you're real casual about your rules and consequences, what happens? It's like not having a corral for a horse. It is gone. Yes? Yes, and I don't, in that research study, you would assume that most of the leaders were girls. I've never seen that, whether it was or not.
That would indicate that girls are more successful in health.
Well, they often make better self-controlled decisions, right? One of the research studies I was looking at, I was involved in Columbine High School back years ago. My office, one of our offices in the Lutheran Church right there, St. Philip Lutheran, and we were one of the drop-in centers for the students running out of the school. One of the shooters, Dylan Klebel, was confirmed in our church. Had all his friends were in the youth group, right? So the whole thing of school shootings has been something I've been fairly interested in. About 10 years after Columbine, they did a study where they looked at school shootings that were prevented, that didn't happen because someone told. In 90% of those cases, do you think it was a boy that told or a girl? It was a girl. Girls think a lot more about consequences, right? So when they hear somebody say, I feel like, hitting that professor, he's such a jerk, I hate him, I'm going to egg his car or something, okay, or I'm going to do something, or I want to hurt myself. Girls usually start to think ahead and go, we better get him help, okay? If I tell him, let's egg his car, what's my buddy probably going to say? Oh yeah, man, here's the eggs. Now, if he's got a bit of better frontal lobe, he'll let me throw them, right? And he'll watch, and he'll take off, and I'm the one in trouble, right? But boys are often much more impulsive and do really foolish things. And it's the girls who stop and say, oh, let's wait a minute. Now, again, so you need to know your kid. What kind are they? The other thing they did that was fairly fascinating with that research was they asked the kids who could wait how they did it. Like, how did you wait? And when you're watching the film, when you see some of the kids who waited, they're looking out the window, they're looking at their dress, they're thinking about things, they're looking at the pictures on the wall. What are they not thinking about? The marshmallow. So human nature is, when we're tempted, that apple tree, were they tempted by the apple? Were they thinking about, were Adam and Eve thinking about that apple? Yeah, they kind of got obsessed about the apple. They were told they couldn't have it. They kept going back to it and thinking about it. When the kids who kept thinking about the marshmallow, they're the ones that, could do 6 or 7 minutes. They couldn't finish it. Best thing you can do for your kid, especially your little ones, when they're obsessing about something, get them to think about something else, right? Basic, any babysitter knows that. If the kid's crying about one thing, you pull out some rattle or something, or you toy, and look at here, squirrel, and they're on to that, and everything's fine, right? Yes?
In that marshmallow testing thing,
Yeah.
for the children that were the non-waiters, did they do a percentage of how many of those children had ADHD?
I do not know that. I know about a third were the ones who couldn't wait, right? Now again, statistically for kids with ADHD, it's around, you'll see different figures. A good figure is about 6 to 7%. It is a pretty solid figure. So 6 to 7% of the kids. Sometimes you'll see as high as 10. Some researchers say 10. I always kind of go 6 to 7%. Among adopted kids, it ranges around 30 to 40%. Now, why do you think that's the case? Most of the cause of it is genetic, okay? So when I got a kid in my office who's ADHD, and I'm meeting with the parents, guess what the dad's usually doing? And he's like looking around the window, he's playing on my carpet or something, or on the cell phone, like, Dad, pay attention, right? They usually get it from Dad. Occasionally I have kids that get it from Mom. Again, if you look at that scale up there, right? God designed it so guys are further down the scale. But it's often genetic, and with adopted kids, if you think about it, who are the kids having earlier sexual activities without protection? The impulsive kids. ADHD kids have 10 times the rate of drug and alcohol abuse, all sorts of problems, pregnancy problems, all sorts of things, accidents, right? The accidental death rate for ADHD kids is 400 times higher than other kids. They run out on the street, right? Dodgeball goes on the roof, what do? Decide to climb up the gutter, right? Two of our offices that are in churches, one is in the Littleton church. It's got a roof about, not quite as big as this, it's not as high as this, but it's pretty tall. And I was playing capture the flag with the kids. And we had one group in the front and one group in the back. And you went around the church, right, around the sides to attack each other and get it. We're in the middle of playing and I hear a bunch of the kids in the front, like this area out here, all screaming and yelling, that's unfair, he's cheating, he's cheating. And I come running over and I'm like, what's going on? And they said, Joey dropped down. I'm like, what? And he had climbed up a gutter he looked at me and said, you didn't say it wasn't against the rules. I never even thought I'd have to have a rule for that. I mean, okay, I'm adding that to the rule. I got that one added to the rule, right? It's like when you take field trips with kids, every time you do it, you learn another rule that you got to add, right? Like, oh, okay, we never thought that would happen, that happened. We got to do this. The rules just keep getting longer because you figure out ways they can drain out all over the place. Okay, any other questions about Fromo? I'm going to move on to the next one. So that's one of your big players for how well you socialize, right? Kids with ADHD have 80% of them have severe social skill deficits, okay? When they're out playing, what do they often do? Push, cut in line, right? He did a study at the University of Pittsburgh where they had a 3-month summer camp. All different kids, ADHD kids, non-ADHD kids. And they had psychologists observe the kids. And they wanted to know, on average, how long would it take for the psychologist to identify which kids had ADHD? You want to guess? You're on the right track. You've been teaching for a while, haven't you? She said 10 minutes. That's your,
And her 2 sons have ADHD.
And you've seen it.
And 11 of them for almost 31 years. Yes. I'm still trying to figure it out.
And here you are, your St. Patrick's Day necklace. God bless you. It's really something. And you're a teaching assistant. That's great. You must have the patience of a saint to be able to do it. I forgot what I was saying. Oh, on average, 5 hours. You could pick out the ADHD kids within 5 hours. Okay? Most of it was that level of impulsivity and aggression. These are the kids who are getting on the bus, right? It's like, hey, that's my seat. Don't touch my bags. Cutting in line, not noticing there's a line. Have you seen read the book David Goes to School? Have you seen the David books? I just love it. I met the author. That was him as a kid. David Shannon, his name. He wrote about his own life experience. And David Goes to School, he's always doing these things, getting in trouble. Half of the stuff he does, he's not even aware he's doing. He is totally unaware of what he's doing. There's one scene where he's walking with his lunch tray, smiling to go up to the lunch line. But there's a line of kids. He doesn't even know there's a line, so what happens? He runs into them and there's a mess all over the place. David's in trouble. David doesn't even notice there's a line. It's like if you go up to the Safeway, at least our Safeways, I'm assuming you have the self-checkouts. Right? So if all the self-checkouts are full, what are you supposed to do? You kind of queue up. Now ours, there's no, it doesn't tell you where to queue up. People just line up naturally, right? And when you're waiting, there's always some guy. Yes, comes walking right up, he sees one's opening, he buzzes right in here, and you're like, excuse me, sir, there's a line. And 90% of the time, when you say something to them, what do they say?
Oh,
I'm sorry, I didn't notice, right? They weren't using their frontal lobe, right? They weren't really thinking. One of my favorite stories, the middle school guy, I had a middle school class, I was teaching him about the teen brain and frontal lobe and not thinking about the consequences of behavior. And a student who ended up going to Stanford, he's a lawyer now, he had a baseball bat pen from the Colorado Rockies. Have you seen them? They're about this big, shaped like a baseball bat, got a little pen in it. And he's sitting, as I'm talking about there, he's sitting, going like this with it, right? Flicking it by his head. And all of a sudden it hits him in the head. And he looks up, shocked. And I looked at him and I said, what did you expect to happen? I mean, if you're doing this? And he said, it was an accident. How many of you have heard that over and over again? It was an accident, Mom. Right? And I like to say, no, it's the failure you used to use your frontal lobe to calculate the consequences of your action. Right? You need to think next time before you do it. Right? Okay, let's move on. Oh, wrong way. Okay, our emotional systems. Now, humans have the most sophisticated frontal lobe. Most animals have an emotional system. Okay? Here's a great question for you. Between dogs, horses, and monkeys, right, apes, which do you think has the strongest ability to feel their emotions and to also notice our emotions as humans? Dogs, right? Of the top breed, maybe you want to guess what the top breed is? It's the closest to wolves. Wolves have 16 different emotions and expressions they communicate. Guess which domesticated breed is closest?
Golden retriever.
Golden retrievers, we said. We have a golden retriever. We've got a couple. One just passed away. We've got another puppy now. They are amazing, right? They have feelings. Animals have feelings too. There are a few animals, some reptiles. If the mama lays the eggs, the snake lays the eggs, and she comes back and little snakes are popping out, what does she think? dinner, right? She's not really connecting. She's not bonding with baby snakes, right? She'd eat them. Most animals, though, if animals survive in a community and they take care of your young, they have some emotional system. Now, most have a very primitive emotional system, which is your amygdala, which is your fight or flight response. So when something comes to your brain and your brain thinks it's a danger to you, it's supposed to get you ready to fight it or to run away. That's a real primitive emotional system. Humans have a very extensive emotional system, and we have all sorts of feelings. Love, happiness, jealousy, excitement, right? All these different emotions. Some kids are sort of like Winnie the Pooh, okay? So we're going to talk about temperament, and I made a riddle up, and my graduate student did the art for me. So we call this holding on to happiness, your child's temperament, okay? And we're going to start with Pooh first. So in terms of contentment, and I like that word better than happiness, but in terms of just being easygoing happy, the kids that tell me, Pooh's about an 8 between 0 and 10. He's pretty happy, right? He's just pretty going along. So I made a riddle up. The characters decide to go for a walk in the forest. And Winnie the Pooh starts on the walk. And he falls on a rock, falls over a rock, and he gets a little scuffed up. He's laying there. What does he say? Oh, bother. And he looks and he says, but there's honey in that tree. And he gets up, and how does he feel? Happy, and he goes along. Happy as can be the rest of the way. Now, Piglet's pretty happy. He's about a 6. Piglet falls over the rock, and what's he say? Oh no, I better go back home. There's going to be more rocks. I'll fall down, I'll get hurt. I can go home. And he would scurry back to his house. And he wouldn't get to enjoy the walk because he's wrought with anxiety, right? Now, a kid told me once, he said, Mr. Knippenberg, if you were this tall and pink and you blew away in the wind, you'd be nervous too. I said, I guess I would be. That's a little frightening, right? Your Piglet, right? But Piglet's got the anxiety, okay? Rabbit. Rabbit falls over the rock. What's he say? Stupid rock, I hate rocks, you're not my friend. And he kicks the rock, and the rest of the walk, how's he feeling? Man, every time he sees a rock, he picks it up and throws it, or he kicks it and says, I don't want to be your friend. Maybe later, he finally gets back home, gets into his little house. He's sort of OCD too, if you remember watching him. He likes to be perfect, just right. He gets back to his house, has a cup of tea. Finally, he settles down and he's happy, okay? Eeyore falls over the rock. And Eeyore says, even the rocks don't want to be my friend. And he goes along the rest of the walk. Every time he sees a rock, he says, there's another rock that doesn't want to be my friend, right? Overwhelmed with sadness. When Alex was in preschool, we had this little video, Winnie the Pooh, this tape, and it was a song of Eeyore singing, nobody wants to be my friend. And Pooh says, but I'm your friend. And Eeyore says, yes, but nobody wants to be my friend. And then Piglet says, but I'm your friend. And Eeyore says, yes, but no one wants to be my friend. And it goes on and on. The child full of woe, okay? Now, Tigger falls over the rock. What's he say? That was great, I want to do it again. And he would run back, fall over it again, fall over it. He'd go home bloody at night. And he'd go home and he'd be like, that's the best day I've ever had. I love that walk, right? He is full of excitement, right? He is just unleashed and always having fun. So your kids, if you think about your kids, and those of you who have more than one, they generally have a temperament. It can be a mix of these. I tell the kids that we kind of graph in 4th grade what we think we are. We just kind of brainstorm that. I'm a Pooh-Piglet mix. I'm generally a Pooh. I've been that way since I was born. I get a good night's sleep every night, not much rattles. I do have a few OCD qualities. My dad is a German. What he used to call it being a good German, we all said, Dad, you're too uptight, right? And he was very obsessive, but lots of anxiety, everything had to be in control, right? A little touch on my dad and some Pooh. But you've got to think about your kids. What are they, right? Because then you're going to approach them differently. The anxious child, they need to be encouraged more. Right? The anxious child, you're telling them to move past their anxiety, take a risk, right? You want them to take risks and to move past their anxiety. Do not let that freeze them up. The Eeyore child, if you spend too much time talking with them about how sad they are and upset they are, they rest, what happens to them?
Make it worse.
So you're gonna stop. Did I just lose it? Oh, I hear some. Oh, they're vacuuming. There we go. Great. Now, can you gate that out? So you can gate the vacuum out. I thought it was raining or something. So I forgot where I was again. Oh, so the sad child, if you're at bedtime and they start opening up about the bad things that happen to them during the day, if you keep talking to them, guess where that's going? Nowhere good, right? You don't talk to them at bedtime. That child, you talk to them earlier in the day, right? And you limit it to 5 minutes. You set a timer, right? And then you say, okay, tell me the 2 things you're upset about, but then I want to know 4 blessings from your day, right? You do 2 to 1. Tell me the blessings as well as these things that are, and I'll help you figure them out. Bedtime for some kids, boys typically are much less expressive about their emotions than girls. The average girl speaks 30,000 words a day. Guess what the average boy speaks? 7,000, right? It's 7,000 to 30,000, okay? Boys typically don't want to be talking about their feelings. Bedtime can be a great time for the child who doesn't express themselves much to talk about their feelings. The reason is, when you're falling asleep, the first part of your brain to shut off is your frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is there to stop your feelings, right? When the frontal lobe shut off, the feelings tend to come out, okay? Now again, if you've got an overly exuberant child emotionally with anxieties and these things, bedtime's not the time to do it. They actually need to have their frontal lobe on. Our little daughter that worked out, then she's been through some pretty rough stuff. She was being raised by her grandmother. She was abandoned by her mom, left with her grandmother. When she was 3 and a half, the grandmother went to the school program, the preschool program, to help in the library. It was on a Friday. There was a notice up about strep going around. She got strep on a Friday. She died on a Monday. And she lost her grandmother that way, who had been raising her, right? So she's got a lot of emotions and sadness about death. And the other night, I was putting her to bed, and she said, "Dad, why do people die?" And she was crying. And I said, "Honey, right now your little president is shut off. And I don't want to talk to you about that now because it just won't help. But I'll talk to you about it in the morning." And we talked about it the next day, when her little frontal lobe was working again, right? So I wanted to make sure she had her president on. Again, if you've got the kid who doesn't express much, then bedtime's a great time because the little frontal lobe clicks off. They're a little more open. When kids are sick, a lot of times they'll be more open. They'll just kind of open up emotionally. For some kids, though, you don't want them too open or for too long. So you really need to know what your child's basic temperament is. Now, to do that, you should also think about what yours is, okay? You need to think about what's your temperament because most of the temperament is genetic. It comes from your parents, okay? So anybody want to raise their hand and admit if they have anger issues? You don't have to raise your hand. If you've got anger issues, okay, there's a good chance your kid is too. Now, if your kid sees you driving down the highway here, you've got a lot of roads, by the way. There seems to be highways. It's like, my God, they're everywhere. And you're, getting mad, honking the horn, putting up the fist. Don't be surprised when your kid's getting into fights in the playground. Don't be shocked. They learned it from you. And they probably have your genetic wiring, right? Can you make a family goal to work on your temperaments? Yes. I had a little girl, second grade girl, she said, "Mr. Knippenberg, we have a worry jar." Because my mom and dad and us girls were all worriers. So we have a worry jar, and anytime any of us worry too much, we put a quarter in it, and the money goes to our church. Mom and dad put the quarters in too, right? So you can do it for worry. You can do it for anger. We had one for inappropriate language. Alex had to put a quarter in, and I had to put $1 in. Now, being a boo, I did pretty well until Saturdays when we go up to CU Boulder for the CU Buffs football game. And I would have great excitement and enthusiasm about our return to a national championship. After the last 20 years, what happens to me? I'm crushed. And the whole time, I get madder and madder, and things come out of my mouth. And I'd come home and just put $10 in the jar. Oh, man, it was done. I just couldn't control myself with football because I get so excited and I'd be so mad when we mess up again, okay? So know your temperament, know your kid's temperament, and together you can work on a goal. I have a couple kids, their dads, choose your dad. I have a couple of really, what you call type A dads, they're like stockbrokers, money fund managers, okay? They're usually type A kind of guys, right? They're pretty intense and they're pretty driven and they get pretty obsessive. They have little kids that are just as obsessive. And we'll talk about, I'll draw a picture of a thermostat, like your oven temperature dial, and we talk about turn it down, right? So being diligent is a really good quality up to a certain point. You can think of the oven. If the temperature's too low, can you make something? You can't bake. If it's too high, what happens to it? You got a hockey puck, right? It's got to be hot enough to bake it, but not too hot to burn it. That's the same thing with anger, or anxiety, and obsessiveness. You want to dial it down. And oftentimes, dad and the kid will have a goal together and work on learning how to dial it down. Does that make sense? Now, in addition to so that your basic temperament, so know who your kid is, I want to connect the frontal lobe functioning with the emotions. Easiest analogy I thought of was basketball. Okay, we have the Nuggets in Denver. They're having a pretty good season, and we whooped New York the other night. Carmelo Anthony, who used to be with the Nuggets, we killed them. It was great. Now, you got to think of your emotions as like the team that just stole the ball, and they're running down the court. They're trying to score. The little preschooler, they have a lot of emotions. So your 2 and 3 year olds. For some kids it's 2, other kids it's like 3 when they're just emotional as could be. So little preschoolers have very active limbic systems. They're just raging. So you got 4 players in that. When the mom says you can't have a cookie at the Safeway, the kid's having a fit. They got 4 players coming down the court with the ball. They have one little short guy named Bob trying to stop him, okay? And he's not very good, he's slow, and these 4 players come running down the court. Who's going to score? The emotions are going to score. Now, by about 2nd or 3rd grade, you'll see a dampening in the emotions, about half. Kids have, well, 1st graders, they know the rules. They'll say, John, if I give out Starburst, I'll say, now, remember, kids, you get what you get, and you don't pitch a fit. Right? They all know that. If a kid has too much emotions when they're 1st and 2nd grade, what do the other kids call them? Crybabies, right? It's just when I was a kid, they still say that, crybabies, right? Because you're showing too much emotions. So now we have 2 players coming out of the court, 2 emotions coming out of the court. You're hoping by 2nd or 3rd grade, we got 2 defenders, reasonably sized guys, fairly fast. So if we can match them up, can we stop them pretty well? We've got some pretty good defense. During the teen years, the emotional system's twice as active. So you can have the same thing happen to a kid or an adult and a teenager. The teenager will feel double the emotion. Okay? I was talking to 7th graders the other day. I said, if I found out my buddy was having a party on Friday and I wasn't invited, how would I feel? Maybe a little disappointed. But then I'm going to think, I could just sit in my leather chair, read the Wall Street Journal, and have the golden retriever lying there and maybe a little glass of Bushmills. How do I feel now? I'm happy. I'm like booing it. The teenager that doesn't get invited to the party, what do they feel? My life was over. I can't believe I haven't been invited. And they're just miserable. They're tormented by emotions. So now, once again, we got 4 big, fast players coming on court. The frontal lobe system we just talked about, the dopamine levels drop in half. We've got 1 guy back. And he's kind of a short, slow guy named Bob, right? Teenage emotions rule the days very often. They often are having problems. You pick up the paper on Monday morning, story after story about the weekend and what happened to her. Driving too fast. Did you hear about, there was a girl, 19-year-old girl, I think it was in Ohio. It's past the Mississippi River, this east side of the country. She had 6 kids and a Honda Passport, a little SUV. 6 kids, 7 didn't have seatbelts on. I guess they were by a mill or something, a mine, and Curry Road, she didn't have a license. She had stolen a car from her boyfriend. It was driving way too fast and just screaming, howling, laughing, went off the road, and 4 of those kids died. 2 of the boys made it out, and they told the police the whole story. And they were begging her to slow down. Now, in that moment, what was she feeling? The driver. This is great! I'm in control, I have so much power, I'm running around with the car. They have these intense emotions. For especially you guys, do you remember the first time you stepped on the gas and you felt the power of that vehicle? You're smiling at me. You know what it feels like? It's like, whoa, this is great, right? These intense emotions they feel until they have an accident. Now, in terms of risk assessment, for a long time they thought teenagers didn't understand risk. They didn't think about what would happen to them. That's not true. They actually can tell you what the risk is, but there's something else that they weigh more heavily. Guess what it is? Friends and popularity. I had a girl, 8th grade girl, sweetest girl in class. I don't think she's ever been disciplined in 8 or 9 years at the school. Straight A student. She's an incredible kid. And I said, think about it. I'm on the second floor in the schoolroom. I said, is there any logical reason that I would ever jump out the window here? And one kid said, well, if there was a fire outside the door. I said, yeah, then it might make sense. But why else would a person jump out the window? And this girl raised her hand. She said, well, I guess it was depend on who was watching you. What's he thinking about? The other kids. And the other kids go, oh yeah, do it, man, come on, this is so cool. Right? And I throw that into it. Teen drivers, if you put them on a simulator and you throw a yellow, they drive on a simulator and the light turns yellow, most of the time when they by themselves, guess what they do? Stop. If they put a peer next to them, just sitting next to them, watching them, guess what they do? They go through it. Right? That peer consumption, emotion, the excitement outweighs the risk of what's ahead, and they favor that over what could happen to them. Defense, real quick on the teen brain. Elementary children, there's a couple hormones that are really important. One that's fabulous is called oxytocin. Oxytocin, when it gets triggered in our brain, it makes us feel connected. It makes you feel it goes up when you're dancing, when you're playing, when you're wrestling around. How many of you love to wrestle with your kids? And they love wrestling with you, right? What's happening when you're doing is their oxytocin levels are skyrocketing. And guess how they feel with you? Connected and bonded. Right? My favorite time in the world right now is when we go to the swimming pool. She's a little more shy around than me because she has been raised by a step-grandfather who, she says, he treats me roughly. He treated her roughly. Is her way of putting it. And so she's been a little gun shy around me, except when we go swimming. And then she's the little shrinky, and I'm there with her, and we're wrestling all over, and she's jumping on my back and dunking me and having a great time. It's a lot of fun for me, and I also know her oxytocin levels are going up. So hopefully she's bonding to me, right? The other day, Tuesday, I took her to her swim class. I was swimming laps while she was with the children, and I came down at the end of a turn to flip and go. She had just finished her exercise. She was standing there, and she said, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And normally I wouldn't stop. I'd just keep going, right? And this time I stopped. I said, yes, honey? And she said, I love you. And she gave me a kiss. It was my first kiss. It took 3 months to break through that, right? But I got my first kiss. That was pretty special. But her oxytocin levels are going up. That's a great one for kids that's really high. There's another one called DHEA that really just helps with that massive development of brain cells. So elementary use, that's a really high one. This cranking helps that brain develop cognitive function, math, reading, all that. DHEA is just creating all these massive brain cells for the child. The teen hormones, that's a whole other story. I'm going to show you these quick. How are we doing on time? Baby, can I go till like 10? In Denver, it's only 6:30, so we just started. Real quick, a lot for females, the teen females is connected to the cycle. First 2 weeks of the cycle, estrogen levels are high. Estrogen helps girls pay attention better, helps them with their social skills, helps them emotionally, they're much more positive. Girls, during the first 2 weeks of their cycle, have far fewer sports injuries because they're more focused. They're just on target. Their verbal skills are really high. Once ovulation occurs, progesterone kicks up, estrogen drops, and then you see a whole different emotional system, especially during that last week. My wife came up with a 2-day rule, and she's on a board for a nonprofit organization called Smart Girl, which was founded in Denver. We have Smart Boy now too. It's a teen girls, middle school girls empowerment program. And she always talks to the girls, and she said, if you're going to make a big decision, like maybe breaking up with your boyfriend or what class to take or to drop when you're in college, if you're in the last 2 weeks, wait 2 days before you make your decision. Because if you don't, you're probably going to be impulsive, emotionally driven, and make the wrong decision. When I talk for dads with their daughters, I always tell the dads, if you're going to have a really serious talk with your daughter, and like maybe about curfew or something, do it during the first 2 weeks. You're a lot safer. If you wait till the second half of the cycle, good chance it's going to be bad. And it's going to be the door slamming and stuff. I had one of my favorite stories, 7th grade girl. I was asking the kids about how many of them got overly emotional in the last year or so and said something terrible to their parents. And they feel terrible. They'll feel awful about it. And this girl, straight A student, great kid, raised her hand. She said, a couple months ago, I got so mad at my mom. I told her she was never in my life again. I stormed upstairs. I found my favorite picture of the two of us at Girl Scout camp. I ripped it in half, and I put me on my door so she would know she was not part of my life anymore. And I was like, Alex was like 10 at the time. I'm like, I'm so thankful I have a boy. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. That is way too intense. The emotions get really intense. For guys, there are some different hormones affect males. The big one, though, is testosterone. So you look at age between 9 and 15, it shoots up 9 to 15%. Okay? It skyrockets. It just shoots way up. That's what makes men men. It does taper off, not as quickly as they show on those commercials for Andrew Gel or whatever, the testosterone guys, right? Where one day the guy's like, I can't do anything anymore. He goes to his doctor and he's out on the golf course. You know, like, my wife loves it too. It really doesn't drop off that train unless you have a medical problem. If you have a medical problem, it does drop off. But it's slow, it tapers off over time. I had a varsity tennis coach from one of our Catholic schools in Denver in one of my lectures, and he said, my hardest part as a varsity tennis coach with these 17, 18-year-old guys is getting them to resist the urge that when they serve to you, what's that guy going to do? Testosterone surge you, and he just wants to kill it, right? And he's like, I'm trying to talk to him about, it's like a chess match. We're going to set the other guy up. We're not going to kill it. You're going to wait 3 or 4 times before you kill it. But he said, that's the biggest problem, is those guys' urge to just kill somebody, okay? Anytime we go to the CU football game, at the end of the game, after the drinking's going on, frontal lobe, alcohol turns off your frontal lobe, by the way. They're all emotional. What are some of those fraternity guys doing? They're clocking somebody, right? They're just doing all that aggressive kind of stuff. So that's our teen guys. Now, third big area of the brain, right hemisphere. It's called, in the middle part is called our corpus callosum. I want you to think about a stained glass window. So we have some right here in the church. The right side of the brain has things called mirror neurons and spindle neurons. Their job is to collect little bits of information that you hear or you see or you observe in any social situation. Okay? Now, in terms of nonverbal, think about facial expressions, right? Those neurons on the right side of the brain, they're collecting lots of facial expressions. So if we did, I'm going to show you the eye test. Let's just do the first 2 given time. This is a sample from the eye test, and it's just a set of eyes. If you look at the top left, A, and you look at those eyes, and it gives you 4 choices. Does this person feel apologetic, friendly, uneasy, or dispirited? Okay? Anybody want to take a shot at it? Dispirited.
Uneasy.
Anybody want to take a shot? What do you think that person's feeling? Come on.
Uneasy.
Uneasy. She got it. It's uneasy. Okay? And it's a female that got it. There's a reason for that. Let's just do the top one, top right. B. Playful, comforting, irritated, or bored?
Irritated.
Playful. Playful. Playful is the answer for that one. Okay? Now, the actual test is 400 of these slides. Okay? The average female scores about the 80th percentile. She gets it about 80% of the time. That's the average female. Guess what the average guy is? About 50th percentile, okay? So if we go back and we look at the social spectrum, socially awkward people have a really difficult time understanding what people are thinking or feeling just by looking at them. They miss the nonverbal. Whether that's eye contact, facial expressions, how close we're standing to someone. Have you ever been, Seinfeld had an episode about, like, people get too close to you, right? And they're like this, and the person's backing up, and the person keeps walking at them, and you're like, whoa, they don't get it, right? So it's that, it's the tone of voice, all these things that your brain is collecting. Another exercise I want to do with you quick is, if you were, let's say you're middle schoolers. You walk into a classroom, there's tables for 2 students at each table. You walk into class and you hear the teacher voice say, everybody take a seat. So how would you pick your seat? You're a middle school kid. Tell me, let's just bring you. Friends, you look for friends first. Little kids do that. That was their friends. What else?
The cute girl.
Cute boy-girl stuff. Right? Now, I talk to the guys, the high school guys I work with. Now, let's say you do want to make eye contact with that girl. Do you think you should sit directly behind her? Probably not. She's never going to make eye contact with her. She's why you need to sit where you could casually be picking up your paper and happy to make eye contact, right? That's a good social skill, right? What else? What's that? Front or back. If you didn't do your homework, where do you want to sit? In the back. If you want to horse around, where do you sit? Back. If you want to brown nose the teacher, front, right? right? If you're hard of hearing, vision, you sit in front, okay? You look for friends, you also look for enemies, right? Who's the kid that's been bullying you, or who are the troublemakers? Who are the kids that are going to be causing shenanigans, right? You might want to stay away from them, okay? You also need to remember past experiences. So if you're Tiffany, Sue, Liz. Let's say Liz and Barb always sit together. That every class, Liz and Barb are together at that table of two. Okay? And let's say one day Barb's not in the room yet, and the chair is open by Liz. Should I sit there? No. Because if I sit there, what's she going to do? If she's not the nicest middle school girl, what's she going to do? What are you doing, you loser? Right? All those little loser things. I heard a great comeback the other day. I asked the sixth graders about comebacks. Somebody sort of asked me whatever. And there's one about talk to the hand because the ear's not listening. You know what I'm saying? Well, then you're supposed to say, talk to the booty because the hand's off duty. That's pretty good, right? Now, one of the girls, who's the sweetest thing on the planet, she said, well, you can just say, welcome to Loserville. Population U. I was like, whoa, that just burned my hair off. I'm like, you're so sweet, I can't believe you didn't think of that. That's because that's social processing, so the little kids don't have a lot of it yet. As they get a little older, some of the first graders do, little first grade girls do a lot of social processing. It's incredible. Our little Lily is very social. She has incredible social skills. And she's just talking about all sorts of stuff with the other girls, okay? About third or fourth grade, it ratchets it up. It starts to expand. Third grade girls around in third grade. I had a little third grade girl then. I was a fourth grader. Fourth grade girl, started fourth grade. She said to me, Mr. Knippenberg, I want to talk to you. I'm like, yeah, honey, what's going on? She said, well, when we go out to the playground, all the girls, they just want to stand there and talk. And we spend half the time talking before we play. And I want it to be like we used to do. We would just go play. And I'm like, oh, honey, I'm sorry. Go play with the boys. You'll be fine. Just run out on the field. They're already playing. And you better get used to it because it's only going to get worse, right? So that starts to change. Sarcasm really kicks up. Fourth grade. Social identification with the group, right? The fourth graders are on the same lacrosse team. What do they all like to get? The coats, right? And at school, what are they all wearing? Their lacrosse coats. And how do they feel when they see each other? Cool. We're part of the group, right? They have that little group identification. Sarcasm. Sex joking starts about fourth grade, right? One of the kids in my son's class was the first one to tell the other fourth graders. He had two older brothers, right? He also had ADHD. He was the kid when I was explaining ADHD, and I said, now, when your precedent doesn't work as well, that's called ADHD. He jumped up in his chair and he said, I have that! And I said, yeah, you do, just by looking at you right now, I'm thinking you do. But he had two older brothers, and he was the first one to come to school and tell the little boys the sex joke, right? That all starts third and fourth grade. That really starts to crank up. Prior to that, when the kids are younger, they're pretty socially accepting. If I've got poor social skills and I've alienated this half the classroom, this class will still accept me, they'll still have play dates with me. Around third grade, guess what happens to me? Nobody wants to play with me. Everybody knows that I have poor social skills. So some of your kids, the average female then is about 80th percentile. Average guy's about 50th percentile. If you're about 10%, 5 or 6% or lower, you've probably heard of the term Ashburn syndrome. It's been in the news, it's on some shows. Autism spectrum disorder, those are kids who are in the lower end. So Asperger's syndrome is basically kids who are about the 5th percentile or lower in terms of social processing. They just don't get it. So when they walk into a room, what's the only thing they look for? An empty chair, right? They don't think about, she's going to call me a loser. I just sat next to the biggest bully in the class, and I'm wearing my Pokemon t-shirt, and I'm 7th grade. Right? They wear Pokemon t-shirts in 7th grade, right? That's really not cool. Okay? So they're on that end of the spectrum. The butterflies are on this end of the spectrum. Does that make sense? One of the best, my favorite movies, Princess Diaries with, what's her name, Julie Andrews and Anne Hathaway was in that film. And at the start of the movie, she's the girl who's socially awkward. She doesn't understand the social stuff in life. Now, it is Disney, so it happens really quick. It doesn't happen that fast in her life, but her grandmother teaches her, and she becomes this sophisticated young lady. Now, in her case, she ends up like one of the Davis girls. She decides to be the Queen of Moravia, or the Princess of Moravia, because she wants to help the children. The mean girls, what do they want to do with their social stuff? Power and control. They're looking for power and control, right? Versus her, she wants to help children, okay? In terms of male-female, the corpus callosum is the part of the brain that holds the two hemispheres together, okay? It's shaped like a tube. For adults, the female brain, the corpus callosum is about twice the size of males, okay? So the reason females are so much better at it is they have twice the volume. They can collect so much more stuff. They're also a lot faster at it. It's sped up by estrogen. The more estrogen you have, the quicker you do it, okay? So I like to say at the school, I was doing an audience talk at the school the other day, I said, now, if the moms are going to plan a little party for the middle schoolers, how many meetings will they have? They have like 6 meetings, right? They'll talk about every student, who's gluten intolerant, who has peanut allergies, who's shy, what kind of music we should have, different decorations, all the snacks, right? Everything's going to be perfect. They're going to have a great party, great kids. If the dads have a meeting, how many then? One. And it'd be like, you have a Costco membership. Do you have Costco? You have Costco. You got a Costco membership, right, Bob? Okay. I think kids like ding dongs. And I've got some juice boxes. They like those. And my buddy here, he's got a roll of cream paper. Okay? Are we going to have a party? Yeah. Will it be as elaborate as the women? Probably not. Okay? Women are processing a lot faster, collecting a lot more stuff than guys. And Jeff Foxworthy said when it comes to social processing, men are a 2-lane country highway and women are an 8-lane super highway. It's really true. You know, watch it. The other thing is different emotionally. Men process emotions lower in the brain. So often it doesn't cross over the corpus callosum. They don't rise up to go across to the other side. Women process it higher, so they often connect a lot more emotions into that right side, into the picture of what's going on around. They notice people's feelings. Little 4-year-olds, new kid comes to the playground. Which gender notices the new kid? Girls. Boys, ever. Unless the boy's got a football. Right? Then they'll pay attention to it. Boys don't notice it, but the research, girls notice the new kid. They have a lot more feelings involved. Now for you women, what I tell you is when you're upset about something, you have all these emotions, and you turn to your husband and you say, how do you feel? And he says, fine. Guess what? He probably does. You're like, yeah, fine, it's all right. I want to go to bed too. That's a whole other talk. So that's our corpus callosum. Now, in terms of why did God make us that way? Think about traditional roles in a tribe. The Israelites. What were the women doing most of the time? Cooking, working together, collecting berries, take care of children and the elderly. Okay? Can little babies tell you what they're feeling? No. How do you have to read babies? By looking at them, you have to hear their cries. Moms can often tell you what that cry means. The dad's like, why is he crying? Right? Mom's like, can't you tell that she's just worried? She just needs to be picked up. Women's jobs were to notice emotions, right? And to bond with each other, because women had to live together while the guys were at home. They had to take care of each other. Somebody had to guard, somebody had to collect berries, somebody had to cook, somebody had to watch others, somebody else's baby. Does that take a lot of trust to drop your child off here at open arms? Sure, you've probably had the mom who's bringing her kid for the first time, and she's so nervous. You've had those, right? And the kid's crying, and the mom's bawling, and she goes up to the parking lot, and she's like, I'm the worst mother in the world, I just love my child. And she's trusting you that you're going to take care of that baby, or that child. That takes a tremendous amount of trust. It takes a lot of empathy and emotion.
That you could work the commercial they have down where it's a dad and a little girl standing there waiting for the bus. And clearly both of them are self-sufficient girls, like Vicky, it must be like the high school, and the dad's all, I think it's her car. And so she gets on the bus and she's like, she looks back and, the next thing you see is he's in the car and it's like right next to the bus.
So he can watch with us.
Oh, laughing, and he's all worried, right? That's great. He's scared, and she's having a great time. So, let's talk about this is the school cafeteria example. Here's the middle school kid walking in the cafeteria. He's got to figure out who's going to sit with, right? You can say that, well, we've got to crank it. Here's that stained glass window analogy. You're collecting verbal and nonverbal pieces of stained glass. You connect it hopefully into a beautiful picture that connects people, that makes friends for you, makes friends for others. You notice others, you include others. That's what Christian social skills are all about, is living in community. I want to just talk about Jesus in a skit. Now, the fourth grade birthday party, a friend of mine is a psychologist. He's not from New Jersey, that's out here. tells a story about his daughter, and the fourth grade daughter went to a birthday party, came up, the girl rang the doorbell, the girl opened the door, and the birthday girl, her friend is there, but her arch enemy's standing right there. And she's thinking, oh no, I don't like that girl. But instead of saying anything, she stops her feelings. She uses her frontal lobe. So she's upset. Emotions are upset. She uses her frontal lobe to stop. And then she thinks, well, how would my friend feel if I got upset right now? If this was my birthday party, what would I want my friend to do? So instead, she smiles. She says hi to both girls, gives the girl a gift, and goes in happily. Right? She used all three parts of her brain to think about her friend's feelings, to think about her emotions, to stop her emotions, to guide her behavior. Okay? Another way to think about it is my mom would just say, what would Jesus do? Right? Or let your conscience be your guide. Those who are impulsive don't often use their conscience. They just act. Jesus is our role model. Did Jesus think before he acted? Yeah. When he did get angry, it was in the temple, right? We call it justified anger because it was an example of behavior that was so abhorrent. He felt he needed to get physical. So in 33 years, how many times did he get physical? Once. And it was justified, right? When he walked around people, walked into a village, who did he notice? The oppressed, the suffering, the sick. He went out and hung with people that were excluded from the rest of the group, right? When he talked to the Pharisees, you know the stained glass window idea? Did Jesus see the bigger stained glass of life, right? The Pharisees, they knew specific rules, and they were really good at trying to capture Jesus about those rules. And he would stop and go, wait a minute, think about the big picture. He had amazing social skills. Zacchaeus had a great president. You know the guy who climbed up the tree? Okay, so think about it. You arrive at some show, you bought tickets for some show, and you're sitting there, and there's like a pillar in front of you or something. You're all upset. I can't believe we got these seats. These are terrible. Or the restaurant, they put us by the waiter's door, right? Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus. What did he do? He didn't get mad. He just climbed a tree. Who did Jesus recognize? Zacchaeus. Judas, emotionally, Judas was what? A hothead. He was an emotionally intense guy. He betrays Jesus, right? So with your kids, if you're coming from a faith base, use Bible examples. Talk about examples in the Bible. Who's using their president? Think about the courage of David and Goliath. Did he have to shut off his words? He had to shut off his fears to stand out there against that big guy, right? So using Bible stories to teach your kids. We're going to skip through the teen part. We've already talked a lot about it. Neuroplasticity, quick. The brain can change, right? It is easier to change it when kids are younger, okay? There's something that happens starting around age 12. It's called myelination. That's where the brain cells are coated with a coating that speeds up the activity of the brain. Once myelination happens, it's harder to change what kids have learned. Myelination in language centers happens around age 12 to 14. So if you want to teach your kids a foreign language, do it before 12. They'll have a much easier time learning it younger than when they're older, okay? In terms of brain maturity for teenagers, the brain matures back to front. The emotional systems go cranking away up. If you've got a fifth grader and all of a sudden they had a whole hormone surge, you know what I'm talking about. It's like, whoa, their emotions are everywhere, right? That matures first, social processing next, and finally the frontal lobe is last. I'll show you a picture. Pruning is use it or you lose it. For your middle schoolers need to be challenged. This idea that they're just supposed to wait till high school until their brains are mature is just silly. They need to be academically challenged. They need to be socially stimulated, academically stimulated. If the brain doesn't use the cells that it has, it just cuts them right out. It disconnects them from the connections. That's the development of the brain. The blue part is the part that's growing. So if you look at the frontal part, the 5-year-old up there, see that little blue stuff on the 5-year-old? They don't have much of a frontal lobe. You watch it through development by 20. Look how purple and blue that thing is. It's working great, right? The myelin. So the myelin sheathing, this is your brain cells, your brain speed before myelination. It's 2 miles an hour. That's what a tortoise does. Here it is after myelination. Your brain fires 200 miles an hour. That's how fast it is. Okay, so incredible speed. If you think about how much you have going on in your brain all the time, it's amazing what your brain is doing. Okay, guidelines for all these come right out of what we've been talking about. A review, we can take them and look at it. First of all, know your kid. What kind of marshmallow leader? Is he a marshmallow leader? What's his temperament? How are their social skills? Give them the structure they need. For all kids in general, I tell you to slow them down. Spontaneity is the enemy for teenagers. Speed spontaneity is the worst thing you do in favor. Also for teaching values. So you got the middle school boy, you pick him up from school, and he says, Mom, lacrosse coach says we need to stop by breakaway sports, and I need a new lacrosse head. I need a new stick too. Are you sure, honey? We have to get your sister, we got to go to the orthodontist, and I have to get home and cook dinner, and I have to stop at the steak flight. We have to have it tomorrow, Mom. So what do? You stop by the breakaway sports, your kid runs in, you're in. We're in a hurry, we gotta go fast. Which stick is your kid gonna pick? The most expensive stick there. And they're going, here you go, Mom. And you're gonna say, well, do you really need this one? What about this one? What's the kid gonna say? Well, Coach said we have to have that. That's what all the guys are gonna have, right? And if you're in a hurry, what are you probably gonna do? Buy it, right? What did that kid just learn? If they can get you hurried enough, they can get what they want. Same thing with that cell phone, right? 5 minutes before your curfew, they call. Bob invited me to spend the night, is that okay? And you're like, well, you're supposed to ask ahead of time. Oh, I know, but we just got invited. I gotta go, everybody's leaving. There they go, right? Everything needs to be slowed down. Planned ahead, lots of rules, clear rules and consequences. Your kids need to know what their curfew is going to be freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. What the rules are for driving ahead of time. Rules for paying insurance, however you want to do that. Their allowance, their responsibilities every year. I always like to increase responsibilities and allowance on the first day of the school year. Kids are really wired to the first grade. You know, this first day of the school year, like I'm a second grader now, I'm a third grader now. And so we would add on a chiller at the start of the year, increase allowance, increase bedtime. That's a great time to do it for kids. Social and emotional goals for kids, right? If you got the angry kid, he needs to work on the angry, or he's not going to be driving the car. You're not going to put an angry teen behind you. Maybe our little dog Lily right now, we're working on focused attention, right? And earning her stickers. She earns stickers at school for sitting still, not talking during class, and unloading her backpack in a quick manner. Positive messages for success. For 6 and under, praise your kids as much as you can. They love it. So you little preschoolers, they need lots of praise. How special God loves them, they're so special. After about 6, most of your praise should be geared towards what they're doing, their effort, their intentions to be a better person, right? We don't need to be giving little 4th and 5th graders, oh, you're so special. You're just so special. Well, you didn't do your spelling. That's okay. You're still special. Right? No, you're great because you worked your hardest. I bet you feel good about your effort. I'm really proud of your effort. You really showed tenacity on the field today. That's what they need confidence for. Also, self-esteem. The founder of the term self-esteem was interviewed on NPR a couple years back. He's from California. They asked him what he thought about his term nowadays, and he said, I hate it. He said, when I invented the term self-esteem, I meant that you earned it. You earned feeling good about yourself by your accomplishments. And secondly, that there was a purpose for it. The purpose was to serve your community. Okay? In a Christian sense, we would say, Christian self-esteem is feeling good enough and confident about yourself that you can go out and serve God. Build community, do charity work, service work, be a missionary. You're building relationships. You're part of the Lord's army, right? That's Christian self-esteem. Half double rule. Discipline involves 2 things. One is, half of discipline is starting behavior or stopping behavior, getting a kid to stop doing something, right? Or start doing like their homework. The other half of discipline is to build thinking, to build insight. So when your child's messed up, you're going to tell them what the consequences are. Later on, you're going to give them a chance to talk to you about it, right? And they have to do more than say, I'm sorry. It has to be a little deeper. They have to explain to you what they were feeling, what they were thinking about when they kicked their brother, hit their sister, yelled at the dog, whatever. They're going to tell you about that. And when they can tell you about their feelings and connect their behavior with their emotions and what they should have done, then you can cut their consequence in half. If they don't talk to you, they don't apologize, they don't take responsibility, double it. Okay? That's a simple way to get kids to take responsibility for their behavior. That's the goal of discipline, is to get them. It is to stop behavior because they're driving you nuts. But it's for them to learn about themselves. right? And you do the half double, great way to reinforce kids doing that. And I don't even remember Leave It to Beaver. You gotta be my age to remember that show. It's a great show. If you think back to Leave It to Beaver, when Beaver messed up, Ward would sit with him in his office at his desk and give him the consequences. Then they'd cut away to the commercial. When they came back from the commercial, they'd be up in Beaver's bedroom, and they'd be playing sock basketball. And Ward would be talking to Beaver about why he did what he did, right? That he was jealous of Larry Mondell or something, and they had that connected time. So use your half double to build insight. Kids need to know about the risk, talk about the risk of things. I'm constantly talking to kids about stuff in the paper. What's the risk of doing that? Getting to think about it ahead of time. Connecting emotionally, lots of rituals in your family, things you do every night, every week, all the time. Whether it's church. When I was a kid on Sundays, we went to church, we did roast beef for lunch afterwards. Then my parents took a nap. Now we had 5 brothers and sisters, so I'm thinking maybe it was more than napping. I don't know. All I knew is if you touched the door, my dad would come out with his belt. So we didn't touch the door, we would play. After that, my dad would come out, play football with his boys outside. Dinner, we'd have grilled cheese and tomato soup, and then we'd watch Bonanza every Sunday night for my entire childhood. That's a good ritual. Get outside, do adventures with your kids. We have a website called adventuredad.org. I'd love for you to go to it. It's all things to do with your kids, to get outside and do things and go on great adventures. Alex and I are going to climb Mount Rainier this June, so we're trying to get the shape for Mount Rainier. That's our next adventure. Emotional sharing time, again, that's that discussion with your kids, talking about their emotions, talking about your emotions, connecting with them emotionally. For teenagers in the car is a good place to do it. They're driving and they can start talking about something and they know you can't look at them or yell at you because you're driving, right? And as soon as you get in the driveway and you park the car, they jump out and they run away. And usually teenagers, they'll start things by saying something like, I think Sue might be going to have sex with Bob. And you're like, what? You know, and then he just starts talking. You got to bite your tongue, just slow talking, right? The fact that you're talking to you is a really good thing. Balance, getting involved versus letting your kids solve it yourself. The sign of a good parent is the number of teeth marked in their tongue. Your kids do need to learn from your mistakes, okay? You've got to let them fail sometimes. There's a great book I've called The Blessings of a Skinny Knee. I can't remember the author's name. It's a great book. It's being taught at our school. Limit electronics and promote thoughtful activities. Video games, action-violent video games, that dopamine stuff we were talking about. When you don't have enough, you can't focus, you can't keep track of time, you can't organize, you can't control yourself. When you have the right amount, you're just super guy, okay? When it goes too high, there's only one thing that works in this thing. It's called hyperfocus. You go into hyperfocus. Your brain thinks you're being attacked, so it is going to concentrate and focus right there. You're playing violent video games, the action games, it spikes your dopamine level 16 times, okay? When that kid's on that game, they've just sucked out their frontal lobe, okay? They can't keep track of time. You say, okay, it's been your half hour, you got to get off the video game. What do they say? I just started! It's only 5 minutes, I got to get to the next level, right? Well, the next level is another 2 hours, but in their mind, it's instantaneous. It's like one big hole. They're just sucked out by that thing. For 2 hours after they play, when they get off of it, dopamine levels plummet, and guess how they act? Crabby and emotional, because their frontal lobe's not on, emotions are just pouring out, okay? For about 2 hours afterwards, they can't focus, they can't do creative learning. If you are going to let a kid play video games, do it after homework stuff. Do not do it before homework. That's the worst thing to do. Don't do it 45 minutes before bedtime. No screens for 30, 45 minutes before bedtime. No TV, no video games, nothing. Nothing light activating. That activates your brain. If you want your kid to get a good night's sleep, turn off the TVs, right? A lot of families don't even have it during the week. But the other thing that will increase your dopamine level 16 times, marijuana. Guess what Colorado's famous for now? We have pot is legalized, and we got all these teenagers now who are just smoking pot like crazy. It spikes their dopamine level 16 times. They sit there hyper-focused. When it wears off, guess how they act? Crabby and irritable, right? And they really can't learn it. Pot also keeps the brain from developing axons from branching. It stunts the growth of extra brain cells. Interestingly enough, there are 2 people in this room. If we said these are the 2 people that should smoke pot, guess who it is? Barb's parents. Pot actually preserves myelination. So the mylar sheathing that speeds your brain up, as you get older, past about 65, 70, it starts to deteriorate. They found that THC, which is in marijuana, actually helps preserve myelination. So if we were going to legalize marijuana, guess what age it should be for? 65 and older, right? They should get to smoke pot. Okay, care for your frontal lobe, the big four. Well, first of all, have your kid protect their frontal lobe. You can't talk about concussions enough. Make sure they wear their helmets. Water, sleep, exercise, nutrition. Plenty of fluids during the day, plenty of activity. Exercise bumps your dopamine levels up about 4 times. Plenty of sleep. Your kids, your little ones, they need 10, 11 hours every night. They need a really good night's sleep. And proper nutrition. Okay, Nutella is really not that great for your frontal lobe. Okay, just find the commercials saying this is a healthy breakfast. Nutella is not. Okay, it's more of a sugar. It's got a little bit of nut protein. Your proteins are your best in whole grain, really whole grain oatmeal. So if you want to feed your kids something for a test one day, whole grain oatmeal, eggs, bacon, protein. That's what they need. They need lots of protein snacks during the day. Here's our brain, the sleep part. Finally, structured social activities. These are just good guidelines if you've got your little kids and they're having play dates or whatever. It's on the handout, you can look at that. Just a good way to kind of manage play date for the child with social struggles, who's struggling socially. Our groups, we run therapy groups for kids, social skills groups. I don't know if anybody out here does that. Anybody knows that somebody run groups? I love groups. We have about 15 of them going on anytime, preschool through age 35, because it's a great way for kids to learn hands-on. Right? I can tell a kid, hey, you should do this to join in with others. I can tell them that by themselves in the office. Not much chance they're going to do it. In a group, and I got 12 other kids, and I can say, okay, speak up now, try it, speak up. And they do it, and I can say, nice job, you're running points for the group, or going on a field trip because of you. That's a great place for groups. So if your kid is struggling socially, you might see if you can move in this area where you can work on social skills. I'm going to leave you with a poem. It's my favorite poem. It goes, there are 2 things we can give to our kids. One is roots, and one is wings. So what I hope for all of you is you love your kids, you do those rituals, you give them a foundation of roots, you educate your kids, you send them to a place like this, right? And then you give them the tools to be successful in life, to learn how to socialize, to learn how to control their emotions, to learn how to use their frontal lobe, and be a good member of our community. Thank you very much. I'm happy to hang out. I know you got to go. I got to go.